Hi everyone, my name is Anindya. I'm one of Luca's former PhD students. Um, I wish I was making this video on the occasion of Luca's 60th birthday, but that was unfortunately not to be. I wanted to talk a little bit about my many interactions with Luca, both as an advisor and in other aspects of life. So, my very first interaction with Luca was when I was admitted to Berkeley, and Luca called me up on the phone and we chatted a little bit about research. Now, after the phone call, I kind of felt that to be honest, that the phone call did not go all that well because there were long periods of silence. From my side, because I was an undergraduate student at the time, I didn't know what to really talk about. And from Lucas, and also there were big periods of silence. Now, of course, later in hindsight, I realized how that was going to be par for the course for for interactions with Luca, because anybody who has interacted with him for a long time would be able to say that there are always long periods of silence, and those are not uncomfortable. You get comfortable with them. Uh, as he has done for so many people, so many of his students, he also introduced me to the topic of pseudo randomness. But before I talk about technical interactions, I want to talk about two other things Luca introduced me to, which kind of became more permanent fixtures in my life. One was coffee, and the second was Korean spicy chicken. So my first in-person meeting with Luca was again before I started grad school in Stock 2008 in Victoria. So I introduced myself to Luca, and Luca, in his very characteristic way, asked me if I would like to go for coffee with him. I did not really drink coffee, but I did not really want to, um, no, say no. So I went, and I somehow had a cup of coffee, and basically to keep up with him, I started drinking coffee, and now that's pretty much how I demarcate my day. Uh, but that was again many fun conversations with Luca, many technical conversation, work conversations, and otherwise happened always with Luca over a cup of coffee. Um, Several of them at this place called H Cafe near his former place in San Francisco. Um, the second one was on my first day in Berkeley. I went to him uh, and introduced my and met him, and he asked me if I would like to go for lunch. And we he took me to this Korean place, which was right next to Soda Hall, this food court. And he ordered spicy chicken, and I, following him, ordered spicy chicken. And basically, that had a big influence on me in the sense that I think I pretty much eat that now 3 out of the 5 weekdays at least. I try to make it more, but sometimes that's not to be. Um, um, as an advisor, Luca and when I came to Berkeley, Luca told me about this paper by Zimborski and Morrow about some extractor construction. Now, the proof of that construction, I remember, was very technically a little opaque. It used information theory, and wasn't 100% clear to me. So Luca just told me, why don't you try to understand and explain the paper to me? And I worked on it for a little bit, and eventually realized that that paper, the most of the proofs and some extensions could be done in the language of direct product theorems. And that was my first paper with Luca. And maybe one thing to say here is that knowing what I know now about how much Luca knew about direct product theorems and how to use that and various variants of it, I am 100% confident that Luca, even at the time when he suggested the paper to me, knew how to basically recast the proof in the language of direct product theorems. But every time I would go to him, he would not really give me any big hints of what to do. And even though it wasn't like for any either Luca or me, our most important of papers, for me it was very important because I think it gave me the one thing I think I needed really in grad school, and I think anybody really needs in grad school, which is confidence. And Luca had this way of understanding what his students need. And sometimes, to be very candid, in hindsight, I realize how much sometimes the things what I really wanted to happen when the things I really needed to happen. And Luca always had this understanding of what I needed. He introduced me to new topics when I needed to, and when I was going to explore somewhat different topics, he encouraged me as well. So he really was, um, in with the benefit of hindsight, I can certainly say I couldn't have thought of a better advisor. Um, Another thing I want to talk about Luca is how he was never happy with merely knowing the proof. He really wanted to understand the proof. So maybe anecdotally, like our second paper was with joint work with Madhu Tulsiani, which was on time-space trade-off for inverting one-way functions and other such breaking cryptographic primitives. And there was a part of the calculation which was a little like just long calculation, seemed like a long calculation. And just before we submitted the paper, I think we submitted it to stock, then it eventually appeared in crypto. The evening when we were submitting, or maybe just after that, Luca was asking me about the calculation a lot, several times, like, I don't understand this part of the calculation, that part of the calculation. And I hadn't slept for 24 hours at that point. So I was a little exasperated. So maybe I kind of asked him, like, what is it that you don't understand? Um, Luca smiled and said, no, I really want to understand a particular aspect. I now realize, like, how he was very kind and generous and did not take offense at my, like, seemingly getting upset, like, kind of being abrupt and saying, what don't you understand about the proof? Because later that evening, or maybe the next day, Luca wrote an email to Madhur and me saying that, as Anindya can attest, I was having difficulty understanding this part of the proof. But he recast the proof in a somewhat different language, in a very transparent manner, and made, like, the bottleneck very evident. Like, what was the bottleneck in our computation, why we couldn't do better than what we were doing, which wasn't evident to me. And so, really, for Luca, as he would always say, he wanted to understand proofs and mathematics in um, in a way which he always saw as a sequence of logically inevitable steps, no magic. And he always strived for this in better understanding. I mean, maybe just on a slightly lighter note, towards the end of my grad school, I was mostly thinking about Boolean function analysis, where Gaussian spaces, etc., make a big appearance. So I kind of told Luca, just as a remark, that Luca, when I started grad school, I did not know what a Gaussian is. And Luca, in his very characteristic way, quipped that I still don't know what a Gaussian is. And I said, that cannot possibly be true. You obviously know what a Gaussian is. And he said, no, there are levels of understanding. And I still think a lot about Boolean functions and Gaussian spaces. And whenever I understand, or rather fail to understand, some new aspect of the Gaussian space, I always am reminded of Luca's remark about still not understanding what a Gaussian really is. Uh, on After I finished my PhD, our research had kind of diverged a little bit. I was mostly thinking more about Boolean functions and learning kind of problems. Luca was more into spectral graph theory, but over the years, I always found myself kind of motivated by Luca's taste in research, in particular his pursuit in trying to understand fundamental mathematical questions in a clear manner. In particular, like, one thing I always think about, and I think this is very motivated by Luca, is that whenever Luca would see uh, two or three different but similar sounding things, Luca would strive for a common explanation. And this is a taste in research he um, passed on to all of his students. Um, and we always kept in touch. And in fact, I remember my just before I interviewed at Penn, um, we were both at Simons Institute, and I was making my slides, and I wanted to run my slides by him. And a particular evening before I interviewed at Penn, Luca and my colleague and friend Rocco Savidio. So Luca and Rocco sat through the evening from 6 p.m. to I think about 11 p.m. without any dinner, going over my slides. And Luca in particular, like, I remember making so many changes to the point that the slides looked very, very different um, from where it started. And I think for the better, the slides had looked much better, much more coherent, much more unified message. Um, and I remarked that Luca, I think, will be doing this again in a few years, maybe 7, 8 years. I'll again come and tell you that I'm interviewing and I need some help. Um, that was sadly not to be. Um, but yeah, again, Luca had this very clear clarity in understanding. One of the things he said, I remember doing making those slides, I was introducing giving some overview of a theme, and then giving examples from my work. And he said, see, when you're explaining something, you cannot introduce the abstract and then give the concrete. You have to give the concrete and then proceed to the abstract. And this is something I always keep in mind while making presentations and presentations or doing lectures, anything like that. And again, look at this very clear understanding of things. Um, there's so many more things to talk about, but maybe I'll just end this video with an anecdote. So the very first time I visited Princeton was in 2010 for a pseudo-randomness workshop at the IAS. So in the uh, evening, I didn't really know anything to do in Princeton. So Luca asked me if I would like to go to a bar with him. I think it was the Ivy. I think Grant Schenebeck, another of Luca's PhD students, was also going. And I kind of declined because I didn't really know what to do. I didn't really go to a bar before. So I walked around for a little bit, and then I decided, you know what, I'll just go to the bar. So I went and told Luca that, yeah, I spent half an hour roaming the woods, and then I spent half an hour walking around, and then I came here. And again, Luca, with his very characteristic sense of humor, said, so you literally preferred walking and roaming around in the woods rather than spending time with me. Uh, and given Princeton's proximity to Philadelphia and my son's interest in both the ice cream in Princeton and also taking a nap in the car, I often find myself in Princeton almost every weekend. And I'm often reminded of this remark about walking around in Princeton and walking in the woods. And now that memory is always going to be mixed with a tinge of sadness. But again, thank you, Luca. He did a lot for me, and I'll miss him very much.